So, as Karen said, I'm Ashley, and I'm here to talk to you about entomophagy, meaning the human practice of eating insects, and why I think it could help change our planet for the better. And I started really thinking about this topic and broadly the future of food about 2 years ago when I was establishing a focus for my MFA thesis. And through that, I designed a system of thought for how one should care for and raise their food in a sustainable and thoughtful manner. And I focused on home cricket farming. So eating insects, it's kind of gross to a lot of people, but actually we've been doing it for a really long time. The most recent proof of prehistoric man eating insects comes from the discovery of human coprolites, which is fossilized poop. And in it they found remains of various insects ranging from ants and beetles to mites and ticks. It's also believed that hunters and gatherers ate bugs to survive, and what's kind of speculated is that they did this through observing other animals and what they ate and kind of picking them based on that. Speaking of observing animals, much of our primate brethren still eat insects, and that is an act called insectivory, so it's different than entomophagy. Entomophagy only relates to people. So the ancient Romans and Greeks also dined on insects. Pliny the Elder wrote that Roman aristocrats loved to eat beetle larvae raised on flour and wine, which is something that I had kind of been thinking about in raising crickets is could we gut load them and make them taste even better? Like, what if they ate chocolate all the time? What would they taste like? I don't know. It's food for thought. There are also records from Aristotle noting the best time to harvest cicadas to eat. So he says, the larva of the cicada, on attaining full size in the ground, becomes a nymph. Then it tastes best, before the husk is broken. At first, the males are better to eat, but after copulation, the females, which are then full of white eggs. And if you're the religious type, the Old Testament encouraged Christians and Jews to consume locusts, beetles, and grasshoppers. It is said that John the Baptist survived on locusts and honey when he lived in the desert. And then coming over to our fair continent in the 19th century, the Paiute Indians were observed setting up elaborate hunts to harvest the wingless Mormon cricket, which they would then kind of like set fire on their habitat and burn them and take their like crispy corpse, and they were able to grind that up and use it as flour for bread, which became a really good source of protein. So that was then, you know, why does it matter? It's been hundreds of years, even 100 years. We've advanced a lot since then. We farm on massive scales now. We go to space. Like, why do we still need to eat insects? Well, as it turns out, most cultures that were eating insects before never stopped. In total, about 80% of the world's nations currently include cultures that eat insects. Commonly consumed insects around the world consist of 235 types of butterflies and moths, 344 species of beetles, 313 species of ants, bees, and wasps, 239 species of grasshoppers, crickets, and cockroaches, 39 species of termites, 20 species of dragonflies, among others, including the mopane worm. The mopane worm is a moth caterpillar from South Africa, and it's a really popular snack there. And it was kind of one of those introductions to entomophagy, I think, for a lot of people that were interested in the future of food. It was that first mentioned insect. And so through my own kind of thesis research, that bug is what inspired me to begin to start really thinking about the possibilities of insects as food and as alternate proteins for growing populations. So a little bit about that thesis. I was looking at what potential future foods are already out there and trying to establish a theme within them. And so entomophagy I separated them into these different sections, and entomophagy landed in the future superfood category, which is, you know, what is abundant? What are we not relying on? What could be an alternate? And I proposed these ideas to diners and ask some questions like, what would it be like if instead of a steak on your plate, you had a pile of crickets? And similarly, I look to shelf-stable foods, i.e. prepper foods, and science-focused foods, which I kind of covers what the other talks are tonight. So it's kind of cool that, oops, I'm using my phone as notes and someone just called me. But so I'm kind of excited to hear from other people on areas that I didn't quite get to delve into through my work. So going back to some of the more recent history leading up to the current entomophagy trends, we can look at the Explorers Club as well as Barrington Hall in Berkeley. They were both examples of Western culture kind of starting to reinvest in entomophagy. And Barrington Hall was a student housing complex in Berkeley all the way from the 1930s to the 1990s. It was known for housing kind of these like social and political activists. They did a lot of shows, a lot of punk bands came through there, and they also did this annual insect banquet. And similarly, the Explorers Club does an annual dinner known for its exotic cuisine. And oftentimes they would include insects in that. And especially this year, this past one, they did a whole cocktail hour that was only insects. And that was served by Chef David George Gordon. He was author of a book called Eat a Bug, a cookbook. And so he prepared menu items like deep-fried tarantulas and grasshopper kebabs. And he served them to Neil deGrasse Tyson and Buzz Aldrin. So, that's all well and good. And so there's some like really famous scientists out there trying insects at cocktail parties. And then there are some activists that are, serving them at potlucks. But then there's this too. So this is a quote from Rene Redzepi. He is the head chef of Noma. And this is after he first was trying to serve people insects at his restaurant. He had a bad experience. These people absolutely refused to eat the food, which is hard when you go there. I feel like I wouldn't be able to do that. But he brings up a problem that I think is obviously still a big problem. And it's about the idea of this food being unacceptable to a certain group of people. So how do we make it acceptable? How do we get people to adopt eating insects and more than as like a tourist attraction or, like the adventure of the day? Which brings me to this guy. So I think we can all agree that insects would be considered a marginalized food. It's a food that we know can be eaten. If it wasn't, people wouldn't already be doing it. We know it's available. We know it's out there, but we haven't accepted it yet. It's just not something we've accepted yet. But, just like the lobster, it could happen. The story of the lobster is, it was super abundant in New England, and no one wanted it. It was garbage food. It was only served to the poor, servants, and those people in jail. And there was actually an uprising in the 1600s in a town because they were so tired of it that they ended up signing like a treatise with all of the workers there that residents could only serve their employees insects 3 times a week. Or not insects, lobsters, sorry. Lobsters 3 times a week. And so it's kind of like this terrible thing. And it's weird to think about now because now we value it so much. Even in the 1800s, they were serving it to cats rather than people. And what ended up changing it was rail systems being built and kind of this enterprising people were like, oh, there's new people that are traveling on trains. They haven't been here. They don't know what lobsters are. And they were able to serve them on the trains as this exotic thing. And it started to grow in popularity. And like, oh, lobsters are actually really good. And then guess what happened? We overfarmed them. We overfished them. And the enthusiasm was too much. And it became the delicacy that we actually know today. So, Another thing that kind of helped with that was chefs finally learned that lobsters are better cooked live. That was not something they did before. So there's definitely some R&D within a marginalized food that I think could help it. But, you know, I think the bigger part of it is that they were able to take something seen as garbage and make it exclusive. And I think we could definitely see that relation between insects and lobsters in that sense. And so, you know, with the NOMAs and explorer clubs of the world, could we continue to get wealthy and famous people to eat insects and eventually make it a nip food? I don't know. It's an idea. And it's something that like a lot of big players are trying to figure out earnestly. In 2013, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations released this paper. It was a big deal because it was finally an established organization coming out and saying, look, we have a problem, and there's this like solution staring at us in the face. And it's a really great paper, and I'm not going to go through it with you guys, but it's readily available online as a PDF, so you should check it out. But I am going to go a little bit into some of the ideas. So we can all acknowledge that we've got a bit of a crisis on our hands, and that crisis is directly and indirectly affecting our food. So not only is it that the threat of warming and unstable weather could be causing problems with our food production, but also that very food production system that relies on a healthy environment is actually causing a fair amount of detriment. So we need a healthy environment, healthy weather, healthy planet to produce healthy food. We also need a healthy way of growing our food in order to maintain a healthy environment. It's cyclical. It's all connected. But what about that cow in the room? So the average American eats 270 pounds of meat a year. That is almost double the recommended amount of meat for a healthy diet, or protein, I should say. The production of livestock to feed this habit contributes to roughly 18% of our greenhouse gases. I wouldn't want to say an exact number. I know that these numbers are changing all the time, but it's still, no, it's significant. And then to grow this meat, we use a third of our world's available land. This includes the crops that we grow specifically to grow our meat. And these numbers are only going to increase. So in the next 30 years, we're going to need to raise at least 70% more meat to feed the world's growing population. This last number coupled with the effect of livestock farming on our planet has like a lot of people worried. So what are we to do? Well, what if we started eating bugs? In this example, I'm looking specifically at crickets, since crickets have kind of been like my gateway bug into entomophagy. That was a little video of a prototype for a home cricket farm that I built. So these guys were my roommates and my dinner. So why crickets? What makes them so special? Water use alone could be a great argument, especially right now. There's, I don't need to read that. You guys can read that. And then what about feed? Okay, so we know there's a problem with the amount of effort it takes to grow feed, to grow our meat. So what if we can look at more efficient ways of converting energy? And it was funny, I was looking at numbers again today, and someone had this retort article because someone did some research into doing actual investigation to feed conversion, because a lot of these numbers are, they're shared around the internet. We all have a vague idea that they're real, but how real are they? And now people are finally getting into this, doing experiments to figure out what that actual feed conversion rate. So this is a number. It might not be the exact number, but it's still, I would say, effective enough. There's still a big enough difference that even if they were to say actually it's only 30% better, whatever it is, it's better, guys, And then if we go into the nutritional side of things, that matters a lot. Even if you weren't eating crickets, if you're a vegetarian, you get this all the time. How do I get my protein? Well, crickets contain all essential amino acids to be considered a whole protein, which is really important. And so, they're comparable enough. They actually answer the question of what I was talking about before, where we're eating too much protein. So, yeah, they're pretty good. So if crickets are so great, how can one eat them? Well, there's a growing ecosystem of businesses being launched in the cricket world, or in the ento world in general. So there's cricket flour, which can be used to bake or cook with. There's cricket protein bars, which I know EXO brought some today. Yeah. So sorry to blow up the spot. I don't know if you want to say anything, but and then there's cricket chips. So the options are definitely out there for ways to at least enter into the entomophagy world and try something with insects in it. But I have another option. Why don't you just raise them yourself? So with a simple setup, you could be raising crickets in your home. It takes about a 10-gallon container, can hold up to 500 crickets, and that will provide enough nutrition to replace 2 meals a week for 2 adults in a household. And it's, like I said, it's pretty simple. You need an airtight container, you need breathing holes, you need something to put their food and water in, and you need a substrate for them to kind of hide out and hang out. And patience too. This is a typical life cycle for home cricket harvesting, what it would look like, and you get the pleasure of also actually knowing your food. So why is it important for me to begin thinking about how to raise crickets in the home versus buying them elsewhere? So some food for thought. This is something that I kind of question a lot. We use food to nurture. We eat chicken soup when we're feeling sick. We give it to people to make them feel better, to make them happy, to comfort them. And do we ever think about our food and what it would take to nurture that? What does it mean in this world where everything comes in packages to all of a sudden have a direct relationship? Even in this environment where, you can't raise a cow in your apartment, but you could raise crickets, and it could be a sustainable food for you. So yeah, that's actually where I'm going to leave you guys. Well, I'm going to leave you with this. What are we here for if not to enjoy life eternal, solve what problems we can, give light, peace, and joy to our fellow man, and leave this dear fucked up planet a little healthier than it was before?